Welcome back to another edition of the Edge Podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by BeaversEdge writer Ryan Harlan and BeaversEdge writer and KEGO radio host T.J. Mathewson. We're coming to you guys following Oregon State's loss to UNLV midweek. We're going to be previewing the game against Cal coming up this weekend. A lot to get into from those two games, obviously, but some breaking news. Drum roll, if you please, as Oregon State dropped a bit of a surprise. I don't know how many people saw it coming today as we're recording this podcast on a Wednesday. Oregon State dropped their 2025 schedule today, and we kind of had heard rumblings that there were going to be maybe some more opponents announced, but I don't think there was a real, thought like, hey, the schedule's coming down this week. So that was kind of a cool little surprise, and we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of it, but first of all, just want to welcome you guys back to the pod. TJ, let's start with you. How are things with you, man? And did you expect to get schedule fever today?
Well, we had heard about it a little bit on our show earlier this week. We were talking to Sarah Elkana. She mentioned that within the next couple of weeks, the schedule was going to come out. So I think I was less surprised than you guys are. Seeing some of the teams on the schedule and seeing some of the notes on the schedule.
That was
certainly is a little bit more interesting than the schedule itself.
Oh, without a doubt. And Ryan, good to see you as well, man. We've had a couple days to decompress from our late night at Reser. I should say our Sunday morning at Reser Stadium, essentially. That was a interesting game, and like I said, it turned out to be a lot closer than we expected late, and we'll obviously get into the nuts and bolts of that game coming up after we discuss the schedule. But yeah, Ryan, I mean, did you kind of hear that it was coming this week? I mean, I was kind of the same thing as TJ. I heard that more opponents would be announced, but not, I've seen the schedule drop very odd times of the year the last couple years, including December a couple years ago. So I'm, all of it was kind of surprising to me. What was your initial reaction to the schedule dropping today?
I had heard very similar stuff to you about we're trying to finalize opponents. Like I had heard there's 4 more needed. There's teams that have these open spots, might be them, might not be. But I didn't I kind of heard maybe most of the way of things getting finalized, but not quite there, kind of similar to what TJ was saying about probably, I would assume, before today. It would have been about maybe a week or two when we got it. But yeah, kind of surprised that it's final today of all days. It seems kind of interesting given some of the teams on here and that home and home with Wazoo that I initially thought was a typo for a second.
Too.
I'm not gonna lie, but then I realized I'm like, oh, this is happening. This is going to be what's going to be part of this schedule next year. So a little quirk, a little something different. I am interested to see how that plays out next year.
Yeah, no, it's definitely going to be interesting, and a lot of the same thoughts you had, especially with Washington State. I was like, say what? Had to double check that one, which was kind of interesting. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to kind of dive into it. Obviously, and perhaps next week's podcast we might have a recruiting analyst, Dylan Callan Crowley, on, because this is something that future recruits care about a lot. This is something that underclassmen on your team care about a lot. Now, again, is this something that's moving the needle for a lot of, juniors and seniors at Oregon State? Probably not. It's kind of like, hey, it's our last year, or this is our last year, whatever. But prospective recruits really care about who you're playing. And we found that out during the process of when Oregon State didn't have a schedule. We were hearing that on the recruiting trail, and it was like, Oregon State doesn't have a schedule. That's something recruits can't necessarily get behind. So locking one in with some decent opponents, I think it's solid. I mean, you open with, a quote power 4 team right out the chute. And, I think there's, obviously some nice aspects to it. 7 home games. We've talked about Oregon State's struggles on the road. Obviously that's not season by season, but anytime you can have more home games, that's always good. So that's obviously a win. But let's go ahead and run through it here. I'll go ahead and run through the whole slate, and then we'll kind of break it down. So in a very odd opener that I don't think Oregon State would have ever imagined, they open the year in August against Cal next year. So no longer the Idaho State or, quote, cupcake openers you've had in the past. It is right into it. You go Cal to start off the season. You come home or rather stay home, I should say, as you open at home with Fresno State in week 2. That's more of the Mountain West matchup. Then you go to Texas Tech in week 3 down to Lubbock. That's definitely an interesting matchup. Followed by a road trip down south to Eugene to play the Oregon Ducks. Come home to play Houston. Go on the road to play Appalachian State. And for those of you who are curious, yes, I've heard about Appalachian State. Obviously, we all have since Michigan in 2007. Up until today, I did not know where Appalachian State was located. The Appalachian Mountains are a very long stretch, and I'm like, well, where are they? Virginia? I'm like, oh, okay, cool, North Carolina. So that's kind of interesting. I'm sure a lot of Beaver fans were kind of doing that in a similar way. They take a bye week, so they play 6 games before their first bye week. Come back home for their lone FCS matchup. TJ, you knew a little bit more about this one, playing the Lafayette Leopards, not Louisiana Lafayette. No, the Lafayette Leopards. So I don't think anyone knows much about them.
This is what we call the classic SEC middle of the year FCS team.
Dude, is this
add an extra bye week? Like this is like, if you look at it, there's 2 like right off the rip of the FCS schedule. You'll get to the second one here in a second, yes. But that's the first thing I thought of when I saw it.
Yeah, so you've got Lafayette, and again, a classic Chattanooga at Alabama type game. Classic. Yeah. Then, interestingly enough, we get Wake Forest coming to Reser Stadium. That's the first of the home and home that the Beavers and Demon Deacon scheduled just a couple weeks ago. So that's intriguing. Then you have Washington State. Please hold. We'll be back to them in just a minute. Then Sam Houston at Reser Stadium. And correct me, fellas, Sam Houston now full board Division I, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's do a little research on the fly here. Sorry, like the schedule I'm 90% sure Sam Houston is full-time Division I now. But nevertheless, as TJ fact checks,
they're conference USA.
Yeah. So that's what I thought. It hasn't been long, but just I want to say like 1 or 2 years. But yes, in previous, and they're actually not Sam Houston State anymore either. I should say they are now Sam Houston. So I better get their thing correctly. And I remember when Oregon State played them in baseball a couple of years back. And then obviously they close out Reser Stadium. That is Senior Day, one of the earliest Senior Days in recent memory that I can ever think of. Probably maybe one of the earliest, since you got to go back to the days when schedules were less and so on, because that's November 8th. Beavers then take the trip down to Oklahoma in November to take on Tulsa. That's definitely an interesting matchup. They have a bye week the following week, November 22nd, and then wrap up at Washington State. No, you don't have to adjust your podcast. I said Washington State earlier. We got a home and home with Washington State in one season, folks. So, boom, there it is. Oregon State's 2025 schedule. Well, obviously, I want to get both your guys' thoughts. Just right off the shoot, I'm intrigued. I don't know, like it could play out to be a very ugly schedule if you kind of want to be glass half empty. Like, I don't love that you don't get a cupcake until week 9, 10. So that's interesting. Opening with Cal, I mean, you never know. Fresno State, same kind of thing. Texas Tech, fun road game if Beaver fans want to trek down to Lubbock. Appalachia State, obviously I know that like I said earlier, intriguing. Like your boy might go out to North Carolina for that game. That's intriguing. Wake Forest, you're getting another ACC team. And then Washington State ×2, Sam Houston, for me. Tulsa, kind of more intriguing. Late road game. But yeah, just intriguing. Like I see landmines littered throughout the schedule. I think it's far tougher than the schedule they face this year, without question, in my opinion. But you never know how things turn out year to year. Wake Forest could be not very good, or Houston could be not very good. But I look at this on the surface, this looks like a lot tougher schedule than this year. TJ, let's go ahead and start with you. What were obviously just your big takeaways from this being finalized today, and how do you think this shakes out?
If we're just counting, this year was 4 Power 4 games on the schedule. Next year it's 7. Part of that's manufactured because of the Washington State aspect of this, which is fine. You have to do what you have to do, and playing Washington State a second time is more valuable to TV than playing Portland State.
Yeah, it is. You're right.
So you would obviously rather do that. You might lose, but at this point, it's all about getting paid. It's all about getting the money. If you know what I'm saying. Otherwise, I actually kind of think this schedule strength-wise is very similar to what the Beavers faced this year. There are some easier opponents on this schedule than the Beavers got this year. I think this year is a little bit more of a level playing field as opposed to this, where you're going from Power 4 and then you go down to like I literally have never heard of Lafayette before today.
Man, give the Leopards some credit, man. Don't serious. Hate on the Leopards.
I'm gonna be honest. I hadn't, and I didn't
see.
Like. And like in terms of the Power 4 teams, you're getting to Research Stadium. Like Cal's fine, Wake Forest is fine. Like you could argue UNLV and Boise State are better than both of those teams, and you play them both this year. So that's a real thing. So,
I have to interrupt you real quick, TJ, just to throw out some of the teams that the Lafayette Leopards are playing next year. I didn't know Georgetown had a football team. I was unaware of that until
Georgetown.
Yeah, like the Hoyas.
Okay. Yeah.
Like I was unaware they had a football team till just right now.
Big East football. Where you been?
Columbia, Princeton, Fordham, Holy Cross. I mean, Oregon State is by far and away their most marquee game if you don't look at Bowling Green. So that's pretty insane. Just that almost puts Portland State into a different context. Who knows? Maybe they turn out to be decently good, but they are 4-3 in the Patriot League this year. So maybe I should put some respect on the Leopards' name, man. We'll see by the time that game comes around. But sorry to cut you off, TJ. Back to you.
Yeah, you're good. I say, listen, you got to do what you got to do to put a schedule together. I think the Beavers did as good as they could. Like a year out, having to put together a independent schedule. Like they've had they've had the time when they've been negotiating with the Mountain West to either redo the scheduling agreement or go independent, which they opted to essentially go independent instead of re-upping with whatever the Mountain West deal was going to be for a second season. So that was their decision. There's only so many games available at this point. So you essentially take what's available. Again, in terms of strength, like let's just cut to the end of the chase. To make the college football playoff with the schedule, you need to go undefeated. Like that's what people want to know in terms of strength of schedule. That would be it was the case this year. It'll be the case again next year.
I think with matchups against, like you said, I think the more Power 5 teams, TJ, Power 4, I think you could make it, like, again, this is not going to happen, so it's kind of a silly exercise. But I think with this schedule, having Oregon, having Cal, having Wake Forest, having Washington State twice, maybe Appalachian State is good, maybe Houston's good, you're hoping one of those two teams pop. I could see this team getting a 12-team respect if they went 11-1. I could see it.
It'd be close.
I mean,
we haven't even seen what. Well, I'll stay with the point of this. We haven't seen what the committee would do with like an 11-1 non-champ from the Big 12 or from the ACC. And what the Beavers' current schedule is worse than what a team faces in the ACC or the Big 12. So, like this year, hopefully we get like a test, right? Like how many 10-2 Big 10 or SEC teams would get in over an 11-1 ACC/Big 12 team, and then see what they would do with the Beavers, because the Beavers would be next in line after that with their 11-1 schedule. So I think there's still some unknown. I to be sure of it, you should probably go undefeated. I think I feel like we can all agree on that. Like if you feel comfortable with that, you need to run the table to schedule. Now, how realistic is that? Well, playing at Oregon is very difficult. So that's a TBD, right? Right at this point. And in terms of like last point for me, like in terms of like what it offers to the fans, the road trips are not the best. It's like it's Tulsa, it's Lubbock. Boone is nice. Like I think Boone in the fall would be a fantastic fun.
I've always wanted to go. Yeah,
to go to the East Coast. Like I think that would actually be legit. The other ones, like, you've been to Pullman before. Like Pullman will be fine.
Pullman in November, that might be snow. That might be.
So it'll be snow, and it'd be expensive because you don't know where you're going to stay. So that would be a little tricky. Like you have an excuse to go to Tulsa. I don't know if most Beaver fans probably care all that much about going to Tulsa. I could be totally wrong, but personally, I just don't feel like people would be lining up to go to Tulsa and then going to Lubbock like in the middle of September when it's probably hot.
Yeah, Lubbock would be pretty hot.
Like it's not like we can go to 2 Pac-12 away games, like go to Tempe and go to Berkeley or go to LA. Like that, it's like this isn't that.
Yeah, I would definitely compare going to Tulsa like a better, like when I went to Reno this last year. I mean, it's it's one of those like mid-major teams that it's like, I think it's an interesting spot because again, I don't like it's one of those things where it's like the weather in November in Oregon's definitely gonna be a little wet, maybe be a little bit better in Oklahoma in November.
It
You
could
never
be.
know. You never
Could be.
know. Yeah, no, I think Appalachian State is cool. Like I said, that part of the fan part of it definitely very cool. Ryan, what's your thoughts on the two games with Washington State? Like, to me, you said you thought it was a typo. I did too. I'm like, oh, okay, home and home in the same year. And again, I was like, why couldn't have we gone to Pullman in like October when it's nice and decent? And I'm like, okay, cool. Pullman 2 days after Thanksgiving. It's probably going to be cold, if not snowy. That is now officially the latest Oregon State's ever played at Pullman because that was usually Apple Cup / CW weekend. So we've seen the Apple Cup. It always freaking snows in Pullman. So that will be a snow game without a doubt. And it's going to be so crazy when you're sitting there like, didn't they just play these guys? Like that has to be unprecedented in college football with the exception of playing a team that you played again in the conference championship. That is the only precedent for something like this, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. I would agree with that. But it has been done before. Other teams have done it before. I know Liberty has done it a fair amount in their schedules in years past. So it's not quite like necessarily that much out of the blue, like to be done in college football. It's a little odd to just see that for for this schedule in particular. But I'm intrigued by it. I'm kind of more of like under the, you just gotta kind of have to wait and see what happens. The Appalachian State one, especially too, when you're going there to the East Coast and especially around like North Carolina, Virginia area in that kind of general vicinity, it's like it's not bad. You get at least decent weather for the most part. Speaking as somebody that's lived on the East Coast.
Exactly. Let's get our resident East Coaster over here. Yeah, exactly.
But like, it's great weather at that point in time, but like, the humidity and cold are probably not going to be the best either, maybe around that time. But then again, it's like early October, so it's probably gonna be pretty decent weather for what kind of future forecasting down there. But definitely it's definitely interesting, that's for sure. I mean, my biggest kind of like eyebrow raise in addition to the home and home with Wazoo was the fact that you have a 4-game homestand in the middle there from after the bye week before you travel on the road to Tulsa. I don't know if the Beavers have ever had that before in a schedule where they've had 4 home games in a row.
Well, they kind of did it this year. They spent like a month plus at home.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to go back and look, but like Ryan said, 4 straight with no bye weeks in between, like just boom, boom. Like I'd have to go back and look. It's possible Oregon State, to my knowledge, has never played more than 7 home games in a year. But they were plenty of years where they had 7 home games. It's entirely possible, but it is truly the only way that's possible is when you're building an independent schedule.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
So, yeah, I mean, nevertheless,
I have one more takeaway. Just looking at this November slate, I did joke about like, it's an SEC cupcake week. I would be very interested to know if Scott Barnes or anyone in the athletic department could answer this. Like, seriously, were there any like big name games available instead of scheduling wins in November? Would it have been worth it to go play an SEC team on the road?
But
if they were available?
Did they though? Because I look at this, TJ, and I see like Wake Forest probably on Oregon State's level. Washington State maybe a little bit better than Oregon State right now. Sam Houston on paper, but a team from Texas is going to play tough football. I mean, it's like I don't think any of them are gimmies except for Lafayette.
Well, would you rather play Sam Houston or have them go to like Ole Miss?
Well, yeah, that's what I was asking. Like, did you want them to go to Tuscaloosa? Like, go play Bama?
Sure.
Sure. It would have been cool. I would have been there. I've been like, Beavers Edge road trip, baby. Let's
first
go.
Of all, not only would it be good, it would be good for your fans. It would be you'd get paid for it. For like ultimately, like we're building a budget for Oregon State as well. That's why most of these games are on the schedule. Yep. The money is good, but also like it is exposure. You're going to play on ABC or ESPN. You know what? Like, what if you play great and win?
Well, Again, looking back
there's a lot of
if it was
things.
yeah, there's a lot of
available,
ifs in your statement.
If it was available, I would be curious if they would have considered it, because I think it would be a cool experience for the fans.
You know what I would say,
I think it would be worthwhile for the schedule for what you're pitching to networks on what you could draw. What are the TV numbers? Great.
I'll say
the TV numbers, fantastic.
In your defense, it's not a bad idea. I would have preferred it in a year like we're at right now. In this context with, again, TJ, you have that game. It's called the slaughtering of the lamb when you go down to Autzen Stadium in Eugene. Like, again, I'm not trying to be overly pessimistic, but we all know it's a tough place for Oregon State to play. Oregon's going to be a preseason top 10 team. That's just how it's going to be, regardless of whoever they have at quarterback next year. It's Dante Moore, somebody else, who knows, right? But that's, Texas Tech is typically a pretty good Big 12 team. Cal, for a moment, had a pulse this year. Outside of that, like Washington State, right? They've been good this year. I get what you mean. But I just think like already, like if you were to like say you handed this, if you're Scott Barnes and you handed this as a draft to Trent Bray and said, hey, what do you think of this? I would bet Trent Bray's like, okay, a little tough, a little decent, but something we can work with. I don't know if you would have wanted to get tougher than this.
I don't think it would have hurt. You're talking about
Brian,
selling recruits on a future. You're talking about selling recruits on a future schedule.
This is decent enough for Oregon State. I think this is decent enough for Oregon State. Right. I really do.
That's fine.
I think it's a decent schedule, Ryan? but I also see where TJ's coming from on that too. Like, one of the biggest things is kind of that exposure playing against those top teams. And if you think that you're capable of, competing at the highest level,
that's
like,
fair.
Why not schedule, some teams like a Bama or like an Ole Miss in there, but if they were available, but,
we also don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know.
Right. We don't
in the end. In the end, but like I see where TJ's coming from on it. I sort of agree with that, but like at this point in time, it's like for finding open teams, your pickings are kind of slim right now for the most part. So it's like it's kind of just like making the most out of what you have.
TJ, yeah, go for it.
Even play like Arkansas. It doesn't even need to be the best SEC team.
That I would have totally. I could see that.
You want to go play Vandy?
You want
to go play Vandy and go to Nashville in November? I know you do.
Yes. Yes.
I know you do.
No, but like I see what you mean there. Like I guess from the perspective of like I would go back, Ryan, to what you and I wrote about after the Oregon game. The Oregon game remains on the schedule. If I were to say there was one consistent thing from Beaver fans that I heard after that Oregon game, it was, is this just how it's going to be in the future? And I just don't know, TJ and both you guys, how many of those type of games you can have on the schedule. We already kind of know Oregon's going to be another one of those next year, unless the Ducks dramatically fall off and the Beavers improve, which again, I don't want to make any bold declarations about 2025 when we're halfway through 2024, but you don't expect Oregon to fall off massively. That's going to be a tough game. Oregon State has not won in Autzen Stadium since 2007. They've done it exactly one time since I've been alive. So it doesn't happen very often. So, I think when you're already kind of, quote, signing up for what's going to be a tough result there, I just don't know how many more maybe they did. Appalachian State, typically pretty good program. They've messed around with the top 25 recently. And I'll say that, to your guys' point, the most marquee home game this year will either be Cal, Wake Forest, Washington State. I get that. That is true. I'll give you guys that. But as far as like, I don't know. I think everyone's kind of divided on that. Oregon State's done that in the past, right? Where they've gone to Michigan, gone to Ohio State, what I like to call the paycheck games, gone to LSU years and years ago. That's TJ's golden example right there, because they almost beat LSU in 2004. And, there were a few missed extra points that day that Oregon State really should have beat LSU. And that is some old 20-year history that I'm pulling out here. But to TJ's point, that was Oregon State opening on the road against the defending national champion. That was LSU with Jamarcus Russell, with a darn good team, right? And Oregon State nearly went in there and won. So I get that point. I think, Beaver fans have seen more lopsided results against ranked teams on the road in recent memory, so maybe a little recency bias. But yeah, like I said, it's intriguing. I'm curious to see. I think Oregon State, is going to need to improve via the transfer portal and recruiting in the offseason to kind of be able to play the schedule at their best. But that's a conversation for a different day. Real quick before we talk UNLV and get into Cal, just kind of final thoughts from you guys on the schedule and give me a grade. How would you grade it on a to F scale? I'll give it a solid B minus.
B minus is probably what I would say. So
I would say B or B minus. 1 year independent, like 1 year out independent scheduling is different. So you wanted to have a couple of wins on there, but you're not going into a schedule fighting for your relevance and scheduling Sam Houston and Lafayette unless you have to.
Right.
So
it's true. It's true.
That's what it is. And come the year after, you're going to have a legit conference schedule, and then you worry about scheduling your non-conference. And you probably do it a little bit more aggressively based on the current state of your conference.
Sure. So. Ryan?
Yeah, agreed. Very, very, very similar type of stuff. And I think it's a little bit of an easier schedule with some of the opponents that you got for this next year compared to this year. Like, man, looking at Wazoo's schedule this year, I'm like, man, I would have loved to have played UNM or Hawaii, but
I know,
but it is what it is, and yeah, I think once this is kind of just a temporary, like, hey, you got 1 more year of being this pseudo independent 2-team conference, and then you get your new additions coming in 2026, and then you can just worry about scheduling the non-conference slate after that, and you already know the matchups that you get, barring something unforeseen or anything like that happening. But yeah,
it's true. It's all good points. And TJ, back to your point as we close out, for the sake of a win, I think I'm happy they play at Tulsa. But if you're asking me if it was like, hey, you guys go to Texas and play at DKR in Austin in November, it'd be like, hey, that's pretty lopsided. But hey, I mean, I get what you mean with that. Like, I don't want to discount that for sure. But I wonder if, like I said, it would be very curious to know if we ever talked to anyone in the athletics department, kind of if bigger games were on the table or if this was the best they could do. And it's possible it was the best they could do, but nevertheless, very curious to see how much more we dive into that between now and the rest of the season. Nevertheless, that's 2025, folks. We still got a whole bunch of 2024 still to deal with, and we're coming to you guys obviously following Oregon State's 33-25 loss to UNLV at Reser Stadium this last weekend. We'll be previewing the road game this weekend against Cal coming up as well here to close out the podcast. But just real quickly, fellas, wrapping up the game against UNLV. I know I came in last week and was pretty hot about the loss to Nevada. Now that I've had time to reflect on this, obviously the result is disappointing considering Oregon State had a lead in this game and, those type of things. But at the same token, they weren't favored to win. It wasn't a game that I was like, coming into this year, I was like, Oregon State's got to win the games they're supposed to win. And if they maybe win a game they're not supposed to, great. If not, that's just how it's going to go with a young rebuilding team. And that's where it's like the frustration that I had is if they played that way against Nevada, I think they would have won. Now, that's just a team playing better at home, but that's the frustrating part, is Oregon State shouldn't have dropped that game to Nevada. And then this loss to UNLV, in the context of Oregon State making a bowl game, which I think is kind of the goal now, it wouldn't be as difficult. So that's kind of my thoughts on the game. Blowing a 17-6 lead isn't good. Oregon State still struggles to defend mobile quarterbacks, so on and so forth. But I saw some positive on defense. Giovanni McCoy, we're not getting enough production for the quarterback position, I don't think. That's kind of an area that struggles. It just wasn't good enough against UNLV, and obviously, like I mentioned, we broke it down at Beaver's Edge. But just quickly, guys, so we leave some time to talk some Cal. Just what were your quick thoughts from this game? TJ, what was the vibe on the post-game show?
Sleepy, because most of the callers were asleep. I'm going to be honest, because we didn't get on to like 11:40. I don't think it was total disappointment. Like, they were an underdog going into the game, so coming out and seeing they lost by one score, they essentially lost by the spread, give or take a few points. So it's not like this just like shocking result,
right?
Like, you're
Nevada
more disappointed.
Was to me.
Nevada was a shocking result. UNLV was not. And like shocking results, you're a little bit more disappointed with. So that's why I feel like there wasn't just this like outrage that you lost to UNLV. Like, that's a really good team. If they beat Boise State, they're going to be ranked again, and they have a no, actually, they don't really have a chance for the Group of 5 playoff spot because they have 2 losses already. But that's a legit.
They only won. They're 6-1. Yeah, they're 6-1.
Okay, sorry. Never mind.
You're
So
good.
if they beat Boise
Yes.
State, they're going to still have a chance at the Group of 5 playoff spot, and they will have the best win, I think, of any Group of 5 team.
Right. I mean, we'd have to look, but it's up there. It's up there for sure.
Yeah, it's up there. It would be within the top 5 at minimum of best wins in the Group of 5 this year, if not top 3, if not top 1. So that's legit. Legit quarterback, legit receivers. Their defense, UNLV's defense, played well. So it's I didn't come away feeling disappointed. I actually came away with some more promising things, given that the Beavers were an underdog in the game, and they still played, I thought, decently well on defense until the fourth quarter. They some missed opportunities in the fourth quarter. Certainly disappointed in the offense. There was a number of disappointments in the offense. Yeah, McCoy could have been better. I didn't think the protection held up long enough for him in that middle
run game wasn't there.
Thick strives when they did absolutely nothing. The running game wasn't there. The receivers were not getting open at all. At some point, Giovanni is going to need some help around him, and they were not giving it to him. It really was, I think, a team failure on offense. I don't think there was a single group that gets bailed out by what happened. The two first true drives, which are right in script, worked great. The Giovanni McCoy touchdown run, fantastic. Yeah. After that, when they had to start game planning against that defense, it did not work out. They gave themselves a chance to win the game still.
They did.
So, funny enough, even after all that, they gave themselves a chance to win. Was it a penalty in the end zone? Yeah, it was. But, there's also, you missed Hank, and the game probably should not gotten to that point in the first place. So
that's what we.
I can't have too strong of emotion about it.
Yeah, no, that's what we wrote about too. And Ryan, I'm curious your thoughts quickly as well on the UNLV game and just ultimately how that result ended up.
Yeah, like TJ said, very similar on the fact of that last play. Having some time to digest and look at a different angle from that final play, I thought it was a good no call. Much to what a lot of other Beaver fans probably won't think that's the case.
It's definitely subjective. It is.
It never should have gotten to that point either. I think just a total team failure on offense. Defense much improved, but I also attributed that to probably playing at home, but especially for the offense too. When you only have 21 total yards in the third quarter and 10 of those are rushing yards,
that's bad.
That's inexcusable. That's bad. That's
bad.
Not good. There's no other way to put it. And that's something where I was just right at the end, I'm sure, yeah, you gave yourself a chance to win, but in a moment where hey, those yards would have been great in the third quarter if you could have picked those up right when it mattered there. But it's now on to Cal.
Yeah, no, and Ryan's exact point, just on to Cal, and again, our old friend Fernando Mendoza and Justin Wilcox and the Bears are going to be the opponents this weekend. Interestingly enough, I know Beaver fans probably remember the last year's game pretty fresh in their memories, as that was kind of a shootout, and it was easily, I mean, you're not even close. That was DJU's one golden shining moment game where he just balled out. And probably the dream that Oregon State fans thought he would be. That was kind of his highlight of the year. But nevertheless, Oregon State won that game. But Fernando Mendoza, that was his coming out party as far as being named the starter. He was the starter the rest of the season, and he's been their starter since. Been a solid dude at quarterback. Cal's always going to have a good defense. Jaden Ott's getting healthy back in the backfield. Cal's receivers, I don't think there's a ton to be super excited about there. They're going to be more of a running team. But nevertheless, Cal is going to be desperate for a win, fellas. They've lost 4 in a row, and by a total of just some, very little amount of points.
9 points.
Thank you. And they got Oregon State at home. Again, Cal's a very sleepy environment. This is a game that's not going to have much atmosphere. Would it surprise me if Oregon State played right to the whistle with this one and is right there? No, not at all. But I expect Cal to come out pretty tough in this game. What do you guys think?
Well, they've really had a lot of kicker problems. It's been a huge reason for their losing streak. So I don't think kicking is something you could just figure out in the middle of the season. So that's going to be the Beavers' benefit. This also is kind of going to be a litmus test for the Beavers' run defense, because Cal, in their 4 ACC games, has only rushed for over 3 yards a carry one time. So if they can't Like, if they can't defend the run against Cal on the road, then there's some serious problems. And that's including when Jaden Ott was healthy. Like,
fair enough. Yeah. I mean, but we saw this team get torched by Nevada on the road just 2 weeks, like absolutely cooked.
Right. The recency bias of what you've seen with this defense on the road is not good.
Yeah. I mean, do you think, I think a 10-point spread is fair, but again, very much like UNLV, it would not surprise me for Oregon State to have a lead and have a chance in this game. I don't think it's, out of the realm of possibility. Ryan, how do you see this one shaking out?
Yeah, I just don't like the ability of the defense to stop the run right now. That's kind of
fair.
it. And seeing obviously like we talked about in Nevada and how Savion Red just absolutely ran up and down the field.
It was so bad. It was so
Oregon
bad.
State defense.
Yeah,
if Jaden Ott plays, I don't like the chances of Oregon State. Like, regardless of what happens to win that game, like regardless of what happens, I don't like it. Now, if he doesn't play, I like it a little bit more, but not enough to take the Beavers in that matchup.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough matchup. Again, like I said, Cal, the famous picture of their game against NC State when they had maybe a quarter of the stadium full, like it's not going to be much of a atmosphere, so to speak. But nevertheless, I think it should be intriguing. And just final thoughts from you guys, real quickly here, for the matchup again, as Oregon State will take on Cal. It's a nationally televised game. It's going to be on ESPN2, 1:00 on Saturday. So it's going to be cool to check out the Beavs on a major network. So yeah, I mean, do you guys think this is a game that could be closer than expected? Like, if Oregon State can carry that defense we saw against UNLV. I mean, obviously, TJ, you caught up with Keith Hayward today to see kind of his what he thought after that. Just ultimately, that's my question for you guys. Can the defense travel? Because if they do, they have a chance. If they don't, I don't see it. So, yeah, just quick final thoughts.
I'm going to say yes, because Cal's been kind of a mess offensively. Like, even against Miami when they scored 38, they were great.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Ryan?
I think it's a possibility. You never say never, but it's kind of just more of like, given struggles on the road in recent years for Oregon State and how last year turned out to be kind of a barn burner of a game. Like, I'm like, I think it's going to come down to who wants it more, to be honest. Yeah. And both these teams are struggling. So it's going to be more of, hey, who's going to want to right the ship quicker?
Yeah, I agree. No, it's definitely going to be interesting. And nevertheless, 1:00, Cal Memorial Stadium in Berkeley. Make sure to stay tuned to BeaversEdge.com. We'll have coverage leading up to and post game. Big shout out to the fellas for joining me on this edition of the Edge Podcast.